Hi, folks. It's Dr. Christine Sauer here with Sparkles for Better Mental Health, Growth in 5 Dimensions. And today I'm very excited to have Coach Jonathan McLernon on the call. Hi, John.
How are you doing?
I'm awesome. So you are a weight loss coach and
Mhm,
emotional eating expert, and you have lost
mhm.
100 pounds,
Yeah,
which is
yeah,
quite a feat by itself, but you also kept it off.
yeah. It's like carrying a mini human around and maybe or maybe a medium-sized human around and then
I would
losing
say
that.
medium-sized, 100 pounds is quite a bit.
Yeah,
Now, you also toured the world in different
yeah,
jobs, in very different jobs and adventures.
yeah. I think I've
So,
had 11
question I
different
ask
careers.
all my guests, how did you get passionate about coaching others around brain-driven weight loss and more?
Y-
What's
Yeah,
your story?
I think this emerged organically, really. If you'd asked me, so I'm 40, and if you'd asked me when I'm 20 what I wanted to do with my life, of course, I would have had no real idea. I was studying chemistry and marketing at University of Victoria. Then I joined the Navy and went through a whole slew of things. But when I was 29, I went through a traumatic experience when living in South Africa, which really affected me. And we can share if it's of value to your audience. I don't
Yeah,
mind.
absolutely. How did you get to South Africa first?
That was a long and winding road. So I came after 6 years in the Navy. Came home to my wife and said, like, I'm tired of being gone all the time. My wife is from Australia, and I thought, well, she didn't sign up for an absentee husband. So I said, why don't we just travel the world and teach English? Because we'd saved up some money and we thought, well, we could either put a down payment on a house or we could travel the world. And so we opted to travel the world. Um, so we first moved to Mexico, actually met a gentleman from South Africa down there, became friends. And he said, one day you should, come visit me in South Africa. We ended up going over to Europe and then living in Italy and then in Poland. And this South African friend actually came and lived with us in Poland for about 4 months. So then, of course, when we finished our year living in Poland, we headed down to South Africa to do some teaching down there. And in that case, we were teaching in a private, not-for-profit organization, teaching young people life skills, essentially improving their employability for placement in internships, because the public education system in South Africa at that time probably still is atrocious. It's very poor. But while we were down there and teaching out on a nature reserve, one night I was going back to the instructor's cabin and I was attacked by 4 men. So yeah, it was. I mean, obviously caught me off guard. It was night. Opened the door to my cabin. There was 3 guys in there. I didn't see the fourth guy who was outside the cabin, and he smashed me across the head with a rock to start things off. And that was when I realized that this wasn't a good situation. I mean, I talk about it. I say I don't mean to make light of it because it was very, very traumatic and it took many years to overcome the trauma of that. So I mean, they were trying to beat me to death. Um, I got knocked down. They were, just kicking and stomping, and there's a bit of a cultural element to why they do it that way. Um, Really, it was they want to draw it out and make you suffer and make you pay for it and make you like just fully aware of every inch of the process kind of thing. But that might have been my saving grace in a sense, because they could have just shot me or stabbed me and they didn't do that. And so I was able to somehow in my stunned, I guess my stunned state, fight my way to my feet and get back to the building where my wife and all our students were. And as such, of course, I'm
So
covered.
I didn't get that my stupid phone rang. That happens always when I forget to switch it off.
That's totally okay.
Question for
Um,
you. When they beat you
mhm.
and you weren't dead, how come they didn't finish the job?
um, One, because I guess I was able to like fight my way back to my feet. Because I mean, there was, I guess, this thought running through my head. It's kind of interesting in this experience. Here I am fighting for my life, screaming for help, like just being kicked and stomped and beat on. Um, and I'm thinking in my head, like, I can't die tonight. And so somehow I managed to fight my way to my feet, um, and then ultimately break free from them. And for some reason, they didn't chase me. I don't know why, um, but I managed to sort of break away from them and stumble my way towards the building where my wife and all of our students were. This is nighttime; it's dark out, and we're on a nature reserve that has rangers. Like, this wasn't an expected thing. How they cut holes in the fence, and there's like lots of speculation in terms of how they ended up there and attacking me and so on. But we ended up getting trapped in the building, so we got tried to get everybody safe in the building and whatnot. But these guys, they were trying to break down the doors with shovels and things, and so we were trapped in this building for about 45 minutes. And
So
I know I
they
was just,
tried to attack other people too.
Yes.
Wow.
Uh, yeah. So it was like ultimately it was a really difficult experience to go through. Because it's like, yeah, I was probably one more hit across the head away from dying, because if they'd have knocked me unconscious, because they beat a guy to death the night before. They beat to death a farmer, the neighboring farm next to the nature reserve. The nature reserve is like, I don't know, 10,000 hectares or something. It's huge, or maybe it's 100,000. I don't remember the number, but anyways, they'd attacked and beaten to death a guy the night before, and so this was on their mind. Um, but somehow I managed to sort of break free and escape. And in the beginning, of course, you just kind of go through the shock, like, they're not going to win, they're not going to intimidate me, they're not going to, and so on. But really, what happened is I fell into a pattern of binge eating and really food addiction as a way of coping with the trauma, sort of the emotional fallout. The After PTSD, there's the flashbacks and the rage and the emotional swings and the not sleeping and not able to find peace in my own head and things. And so, really, food presented uh, an escape. And I guess in one sense, I could say I'm grateful I turned more to food than drugs or alcohol, because I do understand why some people would turn to drugs and or alcohol, because we can't turn our brains off. Like, they run 24 hours a day. There's no off switch. And I say, like, when our brain doesn't feel like a safe place to be, like, it's a really hard existence.
It sounds like a really very tough time for you. So was that when you gained all the weight?
So I look back, and it was actually quite shocking how rapidly I gained weight. um of course, some of it was almost like going on autopilot, like I was retreating into my primal brain, if I could put it that way, and just sort of functioning. And it wasn't really sort of consciously registering what I was doing. I was just kind of in survival mode, getting through day-to-day life, because we stayed living in South Africa for another 4 months.
Wow.
um there were more incidents that took place, none quite as direct and violent, but everything just chips away or builds on and layers on to that initial trauma. It just feels like eventually like you're under siege. um, and so, yeah,
How
I was,
come you didn't leave right away?
um, we, we loved the work that we were doing, and we felt like we didn't want to just abandon our students because, something bad happened. And we thought that we were sort of strong enough to kind of handle it. Um, and I didn't really have an understanding of trauma and PTSD. I mean, I sort of did because I'd been in the military. So they teach us about PTSD, but I had never suffered from PTSD in the military. And so and it never really occurred to me that this was happening to me. And I think that's another, I don't know, sort of interesting piece of the puzzle, is like this lack of awareness that this is actually what's taking place to me in my life right now, in my behavior. So there was this real disconnect. So I thought, no, we're going to keep going. They're not going to intimidate us. They're not going to win. They're not going to scare us off this. We came down here and agreed to do this work, and we want to do this work, and so on. But eventually, like, we were just the proverbial nervous wrecks, I guess, probably on the verge of a nervous breakdown, because we're not sleeping. Yeah, just every time you hear a noise outside the house, you're like, who's out there waiting to come in and attack me? Sleeping with weapons beside our bed, that kind of thing. Like, it was just, it was like living in prison, and you're on high alert all the time.
Sounds like really tough. So how long did it take you to gain how much?
Uh, that took place over probably about 6 to 8 months, and I gained about 120 pounds.
Wow. Yeah.
So I was eating a lot of food. Now, to be fair, I always had a big appetite, but I was also an athlete and active, and so maybe I could, in one sense, kind of keep up with my eating habits. And this just really triggered the extreme end of those eating habits. I just went deeper into consuming huge volumes of food, and it was kind of like, if I ate until I was stuffed, the only thing I'd really think about was the physical sensation of being full, and it was more pressing. I think, actually, literally, physically, more pressing inside of me than whatever sort of emotional thing that I was experiencing. And while I was eating, I was not. It was providing some sort of emotional relief.
Yeah. And you probably were not eating green lettuce all the time.
No, it was junk food, because junk food gives like the sort of the dopamine high that, and again, it wasn't that I was consciously made the decision to, I want to eat a bunch of food and gain a bunch of weight. I look back now, and I think, unless someone's been through that kind of experience, it's kind of hard. Like, it doesn't make logical sense that this was happening, but this wasn't coming from a logical part of my brain.
No. So let me ask you, what was the start of the change?
Who I think we went back to Australia where my wife is from, and I started working out on a farm just as a laborer. And it was probably one of the better things that I could have done for sort of psychologically decompressing. So I was out in a little rural farm town in the middle of nowhere in Queensland, Australia. And it probably took a month of working out there before I felt like I could relax, like there's nobody coming for me at night. Um, just because I was sleeping in kind of a trailer caravan, they would call it over there. Um, and it didn't feel very secure at all. And I'd wake up in the middle of the night, just like ready for action, ready to fight off people, even though there's nobody there. I mean, there's lots of bugs and insects and creatures and critters that thump and bump against the trailer and make noise. And so, but I would have to remind myself, I'm not in South Africa. I'm in a rural Australia. There's nobody coming to get me. Um, and so I think the physical nature of that job helped me to start losing some of the weight, just by virtue of it was 12 hours a day. It was, hot days and whatnot, and just hard work. So just literally physically, the hard work of doing that farm labor for a few months helped me to lose some of the weight. But that really just kind of kicked off a multi-year struggle because biologically speaking, what happens once we gain a significant amount of weight is we have all those fat cells for life. The gift that keeps on giving. So to this day, because I haven't had a liposuction, I still have all those fat cells. They're all there, ready to be refilled at a moment's notice if I start binge eating again. So that's the biological reality. So it took until about 2017, so probably 6 years after the incident, before I finally I hired a coach who worked with me in a different way than I anticipated. I thought I was hiring him because again, if I could just lose the weight. I'd gotten back up to about 295 pounds, and I was really frustrated. Had really hated myself, hated my body, felt like it betrayed me. I was trying to power lift it into oblivion, and relying on pre-workouts and stimulants and things, and just driving my body into the ground and angry at it for not doing what I wanted it to do. And so the real shift started when he treated me with compassion, and it wasn't what I was expecting because I wasn't used to treating myself with compassion.
So you hired a coach for the weight loss, and he actually said to you what?
Well, I think so. We started working together in July of 2017, and for the first like 4 months, like July, August, September, October, I really didn't lose any weight. But I'd signed up for a year to work with him, and I just assumed that he must have thought I was the world's biggest failure and loser because I couldn't seem to get it right. I didn't understand why I could know what to do because I was educated. I'm well educated. And so I had this logical sort of head knowledge. And I go, I have all the knowledge, and we live in the age of Google. All this information is here. Why is that not? Why can't I? How can I know all of this and somehow not seem to change? And because I didn't understand my brain at that time and what was happening in it, I just created this story that I was like a hopeless loser that was never gonna succeed. And he countered that with compassion, really. But at one point he asked me the question that really changed my life. I think this really highlights the power of a well-timed question after a relationship has been established. And he said, Jonathan, if you make a list of all the things that you love and value, how far down that list do I go before I see your name? And really that question just stopped me because it wasn't that I was like somehow on the bottom of the list, but it was like I was not on the list, period. So I hadn't really given myself the opportunity to even consider that I was allowed to love and value myself. I just always sort of hated and loathed my body and myself for all of my perceived failings and how my body had let me down. And so that question really kind of startled me in a sense, because here was this guy who I thought I'd hired to, I don't know, help me lose weight and look better with my shirt off, asking this kind of question. And it really confronted a lot of the beliefs I held about myself, about compassion, about masculinity, and so on. And so that sort of began this journey into the world of compassion, which has actually ultimately become the central tenet of the work that I do now.
So tell me about how long did it take you to actually lose the weight and be fit like you're now? And what do you do now?
Well, I joke that I've lost over 600 pounds because the number of times I've lost and gained weight. But ultimately, and I say it like, if I knew then what I know now, it probably would have taken like less than a year. But it really ultimately took about, and since starting working with him, I lost about 50, 60 pounds working with him. So that got me down to, because I'd lost about 40 pounds, but then I just was, kind of losing and gaining the same 30 pounds over and over again, kind of thing. So it probably took about 18 months to really lose 100 pounds. And part of that was just like learning how to keep the weight off and manage it, and making peace with the fact that for the rest of my life, because I think there's this idea out there that if I lose the weight, once I lose weight, I'm good. And it's like, well, no, in reality, our biology is such that our body would love to stack that weight back on, because body fat biologically is our famine survival reserve.
Mhm.
And so what really stunned me was how quickly I can regain weight, because I have all those fat cells ready to be refilled. Um, and just to take one step back, back in about 2015, I took December off of dieting back that year, and I gained 21 pounds in 3 weeks, and it just sent me into a tailspin, because it would take me maybe 3 4 months to lose that weight, and here in 3 weeks I could regain the weight. So I think there was a lot of time spent wrestling with this reality that in order to keep the weight off, I have to permanently change how I'm living. I can't just, do the diet and then go back to whatever I was doing before.
Mm. That must have been quite hard. So what helped you the most? Was it your coach or what was it?
Well, I think he really laid the groundwork for that. And then I think, because it was recognizing that this isn't an issue of knowledge. This isn't an issue of knowing that vegetables are healthy and junk food is not. This was an issue of like my relationship to myself, my relationship to food, my relationship to my body, and really cultivating this sense of compassion, giving myself permission to struggle and to be human and to make mistakes, and really breaking free from that all or nothing mindset that so many people still wrestle with to this day. Like, if I can't do it perfectly, I won't do it at all. Because of the sense of shame that I felt around making mistakes. Whereas now I'm quite content being human and making mistakes and learning and so on. So I really think it's compassion that made the biggest difference.
John, you really hear your authenticity and your honesty when you're telling your story. And I'm sure the listeners and watch viewers, they appreciate that too.
Hmm.
Now, let us know, what do you mean when you say brain-driven weight loss?
Yeah. It's a term, I think I've coined it. I haven't heard anybody else use it, but it's. I'm trying to explain to people maybe what weight loss actually looks like. So the brain is where our behaviors originate, really. The brain is where our mind is, and so on. And so it's like, if we would like to lose weight and actually keep it off for good, we have to change our patterns of behavior. And if we're going to do that, we have to work with our brain the way that our brain works. So maybe to create a contrast, we'll look at typically how people try to lose weight. So they start a program, and maybe it's a 3 month program, and they say, in 3 months, maybe I'm going to lose 30 pounds. And it changes the way they're eating and living kind of overnight. You have to follow all these rules now and do all these things and cut out all these things. And we can do that for a short period of time and maybe even see some results. But ultimately, over time, when stress and real life happens to us, we revert back to our old patterns of behavior, not because we're a failure, but because under stress, we do the things that don't require much conscious thought. So if we know that that's kind of the pattern, we go, well, we need to take a different approach to this. So it's rather than, I almost look at it like we're going to help reverse engineer your healthy lifestyle piece by piece. So we're going to teach your brain a new set of skills, but we're going to do it in a sort of a consecutive fashion rather than trying to give you everything all at once. And then we look at the way I think about this is like, our brain learns really quickly. So let's say I feel stressed, I eat chocolate, I feel better. Bingo. We just learned a new skill. I feel stressed, I
Mhm.
eat chocolate, I feel better.
And it
Um,
works.
and
Absolutely, it does.
It does. It works in the short term, but it has the unfortunate side effect of, let's say, we keep going back to that, and then we gain weight. So then we develop a story. Maybe we might say, like, I'm a chocoholic. So we create a story to try to explain our behavior. And then that story reinforces the behavior pattern, and it sort of becomes this back and forth struggle. Because so then we might say, well, I need to cut out chocolate altogether. I'm giving up chocolate, never eating it again, because I need to lose the weight, and chocolate's the problem. Well, we can white knuckle for so long, but eventually your brain goes looking for that solution, because it goes, remember, when I'm stressed, I eat chocolate, I feel better. And it goes back to that. And so we have to kind of work with our brain to kind of unwire these new patterns, these old patterns of behavior, and wire in new patterns of behavior. And so we want to take advantage of our brain's propensity for forming habits. And James Clear in Atomic Habits, he really popularized it because of great marketing. But Charles Duhigg was kind of the one before him. But so that's one element of it, is really how do we create patterns of behavior that ultimately become our way of living. But then there's the coaching or the human element to it. So how do we navigate the emotional roller coaster of trying to create change in our life and do this in real life when real life throws us curveballs and pandemics and inflation and uncertainty and so on? Because I think there's this idea still that if I'm going to try to lose the weight, I need the perfect circumstances in order to do this. And it's like, well, if we're going to do this for life, we got to be able to figure out how do we do this in real life. And so the coaching element is really guiding people through that. And so it's kind of both of it, because we need to take care of the emotional part, we take care of sort of the mental and the psychological part, and really the metabolic part as well. So how do we get our metabolism functioning optimally? And so in a nutshell, I try to say my goal is to marry the science of metabolism with the psychology of behavior change and the compassion of human connection to create life-changing transformations for people.
Sounds like a great family.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I mean, it makes total sense, because so many people say, oh, January 1st, I'll start losing weight.
Yeah. Yeah.
And they do it for 4 weeks. They go to the gym
Yep.
memberships rocket.
Yeah.
They do go join the Weight Watchers, and they lose 20, 30, 40 points. Hit a plateau. And they say, oh, I'm a failure. I'll never do it. Let's eat the cake again.
Yeah.
So what does a coach do differently?
Yeah. I think really a good coach doesn't have all the answers, but they have really great questions that help the person find the answers within themselves. So I start with this lens or perspective that all behavior makes sense. So I don't necessarily mean that all behavior is good or beneficial, but if we start from this place of all behavior makes sense, let's understand why this behavior is happening. So when we don't understand this, we create a story. I'm a loser. I have no willpower. I have no discipline. I'm hopeless. Or that's our explanation. But it's like, well, no, let's understand what your brain's doing. So if we say this behavior solves a problem, okay, what's the problem this behavior is solving? What's the need that this behavior is meeting? And you're not a bad person for doing this. Now, I'm not suggesting people continue to do this. So I'll give kind of an example. So let's just say, I pop by your house unexpectedly for a visit on a Tuesday afternoon, and you're sitting on the couch, and there's a bottle of wine that's kind of 3/4 finished. And if I was to come in and say, well, Christine, what are you doing? Are you stupid? You know better than this. Don't do that. So immediately that tone and sort of those words create a feeling of being judged.
Yeah.
And so when we feel judged, our first response is not to change the behavior, but to get better at hiding the behavior. So we're just more deeply internalizing the behavior. And so judgment doesn't really solve the problem. So a lot of people think like they have to present like the perfect sort of data for me when I'm coaching them. Let me show you all my perfect meals and things, and I'll hide all the other things. So judgment doesn't help. Now on the other side, though, if I was to come and say, oh well, you know what, you're already 3/4 done, you might as well polish the whole thing off. Well, that's called enabling. So let's say if I'm afraid to be with you in those uncomfortable emotions, my first response is to try to sort of gloss over them and say, well, just keep drinking that. Let's just like not think about these uncomfortable feelings you're having right now. So compassion is really walking the middle road. And we say, let's understand what's happening. I'm going to sit with you while you're processing these difficult emotions and help you to understand, or let's get clarity on why we're doing this without the judgment. And so it's almost like I have this expression, it's not a great one, but I call it wrestle with our demons in the light. So when we can come into a judgment-free space and talk about why we're doing what we're doing with the earnest desire to change, that's where really amazing things can happen. And so we remove the lens of judgment, we remove the enabling, and we get willing to be uncomfortable and uncomfortable together. So you're no longer going to be alone in this, because as human beings, we're wired to connect to other human beings. We're wired to learn from each other. If information was the problem, Google would have solved it, but it didn't. And so we still need human connection. And I think here's my philosophy. Here's my reason why. Hypothesis. We as human beings, if we need to create change, we actually have to become vulnerable. So we have to move into this vulnerable state to create change because we're learning new skills and new behaviors. Now, if we feel alone or isolated, our primal brain doesn't allow us to become vulnerable. It resists all of our change efforts. But when we're connected to a safe human being who's going to be with us, they have our back, they're there to guide us and to help us and support us, it is now safe to become that and to go through this process of change. And I think this is really why coaching is still very much a thing, because it's a very human thing.
And I totally agree. I think coaching is superior to institutions like Weight Watchers, where you don't know who are those other people. If I go forward and I gain 10 pounds this week, will they point the fingers and say, "You loser there"?
Yeah, it doesn't help,
No. They try to avoid it, but I think it still happens in some groups, and it's not helpful to be judged.
Sure. And we think of like shows like The Biggest Loser and sort of they the Biggest Loser is about creating dramas, like really, but it's not very exciting to watch someone lose the weight over the course of 12 months versus over 6 weeks, extreme weight loss. And so but it's not how it should go. And so
and the Biggest Losers, they lose the weight, and when you look at them a year later, they are the same old weight. They just don't show it on TV anymore.
Yeah, because
people think, oh, it works. All I have to do is go on that crash diet for 6 weeks and lose 100 pounds, and that's it. As you said, it's nonsense. It does not work. So I love when you say that. So what do you think is the best diet for long-term weight loss?
That's a good question. I call myself a dietary agnostic. And what I mean is I don't think there is one best way of eating. But what we do know is that there are fundamental principles that lead us to being healthier. So we know that if we eat mostly whole foods, so mostly foods that don't come in, shelf stable packaging, if we eat, maybe aside from like lentils and rice and things like that. So if we eat mostly whole foods, if we include protein in most of our meals, if we eat lots of vegetables, if we drink water, if we get quality sleep and we manage our stress, we're probably going to be reasonably healthy. So what most sort of named or fad diets are doing is just repackaging the same thing with an exciting new color, exciting new label and things to try to draw you in. And so it's rather, and so if we look at all the popular ones, we go, what do they all really have in common? Well, they kind of have these 5 or 6 principles in common. They're just presented a little bit differently with some tweaks or adjustments. So it's like, can we, and for some people, maybe keto works for them. There are some merits to keto, even though I don't recommend it for most people. There are some merits to it. There is some merits to vegetarianism, veganism, even though I don't recommend it for all people, and so on. So it's like we're going to go in this process of discovery and figure out, how do we shape your way of eating? So it's not me imposing my rules on you. That doesn't work. It's, we're going to try this out and we're going to get some feedback. So you try this, you see how it works, you give me feedback, we make adjustments. And ultimately, so I'm empowering people to not follow Coach John's rules, but to develop their own lifestyle and take ownership of that way of living. And that's why when we finish working together, my clients continued to be weight loss, because I didn't put them in a straitjacket of rules. I said, I'm empowering you through this guided process to create your own healthy lifestyle. And in the process of doing that, when we're done working together, it's yours to keep. So
I think that is beautifully expressed what a coach does as expressed to a diet program.
Right. Yeah.
You empower your clients to create their own healthy lifestyle and keep it. It's theirs to keep. Hey, isn't that cool?
It is.
That's a gift of coaching. After you finished with your coach, you have that gift that you developed yourself with the relationship together with your coach. Now that is lovely. Now you talk about non-food and non-exercise factors that are crucial in weight loss. Tell us about those.
Yeah. So when we want to lose weight, for example, I think we focus so much on what we eat and how we exercise, and they're valuable. Of course, we can't ignore that. But when we ignore the stress, when we ignore the mental health and the emotional health component of things, and when we disregard the quality of sleep that we get, all of these things make it nearly impossible to stick to anything. And so there's a term called allostatic load. And it's not commonly used, but what it's referring to is really like the sum of all excess stress that we experience. In other words, if we had like a meter on our foreheads, and there's on one side, it's sort of gray, so it's not very exciting. And then as it climbs up and up and up, it goes to green because we do need some stress. Stress is impetus to grow and change. It's good for us. But then when you start going down the other side of the gauge or the meter, if think just kind of like a speedometer, now it's turning red because the amount of stress we're experiencing, not just like it can be mental, it can be emotional, it can be physical, it can be spiritual. The amount of stress that we are experiencing exceeds our capacity to recover. So we can try to push harder and push harder and push harder, and it might work in the short term, but eventually it breaks. And so, at a certain point in time, the check engine light comes on in our body and says something needs your attention. And if we ignore it, because there's warning signs, but we often ignore it, trying to force our body to do something it doesn't want to do. Eventually something breaks. And so that the analogy I kind of give is that we put like black electrical tape over the check engine light on our dashboard. I'm just going to cover it up so I can't see it, and then I can't think about it as a problem. But under the surface, it's still happening until eventually something breaks and something more serious happens. And so if we don't proactively, because I think we live in a mentally and emotionally stressful world. Physically, not so much, not anymore. We can do everything from the push of a button on a smartphone. So really most of our stress is now emotional and mental or cognitive, because our brains aren't really wired to thrive in this digital world, truthfully. And so we are stimulating our brain all the time. And so if we don't proactively manage our stress, all of our efforts to create weight loss are going to be really, really difficult. And of course, if we don't recharge our batteries properly with quality sleep, this is going to be really difficult. Now, I say this as the parent of a toddler, and I'm not getting my 8 hours of beautiful, perfect sleep every night. But I also get the privilege of holding this little boy in my arms when he wakes up in the middle of the night and just, loving on him. So it's a fair trade-off in my books. But I say we make the best of what we have. I guess that's what I share that, because I'm not saying that we all have to have perfect nights of sleep every night. But really we do the best we can with what we have and what our circumstances are. For myself and my wife, we're getting woken up multiple times a night by this beautiful little boy. And hey, we just kind of make it work, Hopefully we have hopes one day that we might actually be able to sleep through the night again. Maybe. I think that time will come.
Well, it depends if you choose to have another kid.
Well, yes, I think that's sort of in the future, I guess we could say. I was trying to think of a better term, but anyways, in the future, yes. So probably, I don't know if we'll ever sleep well again for the rest of our life.
You will. I say that as a mother of two boys who are adults by now.
Yes,
but
yeah.
For the first year or two, they're 15 months apart, by the way.
Yeah.
So it was a very sleepless time in the beginning.
Yes.
But you manage.
Yeah, it's surprising what we
can do.
Humans
are made to manage, but there comes a time when you get a restful sleep again. So
that'll be amazing.
No, it's hard to believe, seeing you today, that at some point you were more than 300 pounds.
Yeah.
I'm sure you miss that time big time. What do you miss most?
Well, I think this is a really important one, because we would look at that and say everything about that was bad. And I said, well, not necessarily. There were some things about that were maybe attractive. So for one, I ate whatever I wanted. Well, that feels great in the moment. I didn't care how much I ate. I could eat whatever I want. I could kind of be the life of the party. I could just, show up and encourage everybody else to overeat to sort of cover up for my own disordered eating behaviors. Really, I was quite warm. Never had to wear a heavy winter jacket because I had a lot of insulation. So I think it was just, it was like this freedom to not think about the glaring problem that was staring me in the face. And so, and why I think it's important to acknowledge that is because if we think that it's 100% bad, well, then we would easily change. But why there's resistance to change is because also maybe a part of me liked the identity that I had as a jolly fat guy. So that created social connection. So if I go to the party, hey, it's the jolly fat guy here. And I mean, of course I'm masking my pain, really, but I got to be the jolly fat guy, the fun guy at a party and everybody likes to eat junk food at a party. So I had to leave that behind in order to create change. And it sounds dramatic, but it's almost like a metaphorical type of death. So a death to that old identity. And I had to leave it behind for good if I was going to move forward.
So there was some kind of grief for that old persona that you had to leave behind to morph into the new, healthier, slimmer you.
Yeah. And I think like it's kind of, most people don't talk about it because it's kind of scary or daunting, or maybe it sounds weird to talk about it like this, but like this is the reality is so I wrote a dear old Jonathan letter. And that was kind of one of the ways that I was bringing closure to this old identity. And it was like, hey, we had some really good times, man. We could smash a buffet, and tell you what, at those parties, boy, and so on. And so I acknowledged all the things that were that I enjoyed about that identity. But then I said, I think it's time to move on because I'm moving to something better. And here's the reasons why. And so that was part of the process of actually leaving behind this old identity that was no longer serving me. It was no longer helping me. It was hurting me. It was causing suffering.
Oh, well, we'll slowly wrap up. So
Mm,
if people heard that and they connect with their story and say, yeah, I could use some more compassion for my body that is grossly overweight, unhealthy,
mm,
my joints crack when I try to get upstairs and all that.
yeah.
I huff and puff and I don't fit in chairs with arm rails. What can I do? Where can I go to meet Coach John? I want to talk to him and see what it would mean to maybe work with him.
Yeah, absolutely. And for those who are listening or watching, like, what you see is what you get. The person that's talking to Christine today is the person you're going to talk to. There's no pretense here, um, because I've been in your shoes.
And I think that
So,
comes through. I really think it does.
well, thank you. And so freedomnutritioncoach.com would be my website. You're welcome to have a look there. And on there's a link to book a free chat. Um, it's just, we're going to talk like two human beings. I think for me in the work that I do, it's really important that I get to understand the person and their story. And I'll say I'm not for everybody. Not everybody wants to work, with the way that I work with people. And that's why I think it's really important that I just have a chat with you as a human being, get to know your story, how you got to where you are, where you want to get to, and maybe why you've been struggling to get there by yourself. And if after that we might, I might say, hey, I think I can help you. And here's how I help
That's
people.
Rudy, our dog.
There you go. You're cute and adorable furry little friend.
Yeah, he's a sweet lover dog.
Yes.
If there ever is one, it's him.
Yes. So, so freedomnutritioncoach.com. I do have an ebook called Crush Your Cravings. I was like freedomnutrition.rocks. So freedomnutrition.rocks/book. That's I tried to make an easy link to remember. That'll take you to where you can just enter your name and email address, and I'll email you a copy.
Now, what I'll do is underneath the video and in the show
mm,
notes to the podcast, I'll put the link to your website
yeah.
and the links to your book and the 7-day challenge that you
Oh,
also
yeah.
have.
That's right. The 7-day
So people
emotional
can
eating
try
challenge.
it out and
Yeah.
see if they like what they see and make an appointment with you and then go from there.
That sounds great. And the last thing I'll just mention is I have a podcast called Between the Before and After, and it's about exploring people's stories of overcoming adversity in life. And I started it because I just find that I'm really passionate about human stories and inspiring others, because we as human beings learn through stories. That's what our brains are wired to do. And so when we read somebody else's story, we look for elements of ourselves in it to give ourselves hope. And so my hope is to give people hope through telling remarkable stories of overcoming adversity.
That is wonderful. I love that. I try to do the same in this podcast in a different way. And I think that's a big advantage actually of coaching, that you can preview the coach. You can meet him on video or her on video and see, is it a person that I like? Or is it somebody that I'm totally turned off with? And that's my criticism sometimes with psychologists. I can't just go look at them and say, do I want that? Or is that an idiot person that I personally can't connect with?
Yeah,
So I
absolutely.
think that's a big, big advantage of most coaches, that they're accessible. You can talk to them beforehand, before you buy it, more or less. You don't have to come there with $100 note in your hand.
Well,
I
these
like
days,
that idea.
I think psychologists are like $200 an hour now, or $250 an hour. It's
Well, nothing against that if they really achieve
right.
the transformation, and some do. But
Yeah.
like with coaches, there's good apples and there's little pebbles.
Yes, that's true.
And most people like to audition the persons they want to
Mm,
work with beforehand, just like anything. And
yeah,
I
and
like that idea.
the beauty of so I do everything online, so it's all remote. And like you've said, you can feel the authenticity and the energy, even just in this conversation, even though you're 3 hours away and well, you're 3 days drive away or something, but in terms of time zones, and that's the beauty of it is I can work with people. You don't have to live in my city to work with me, and so I think that's one of the great advantages to having the internet with us now.
Although I love Red Deer, I've been there, and the mountains are so close.
They
It's
are.
gorgeous, Alberta.
Yeah.
I
There's some
love the
great
ocean.
trails.
I love the mountains. I love it all. And I love you and what you do. Thank you so much for being on the podcast today. It was a pleasure to have you.
Thank you. It was a pleasure.
And that's it for today's version of Sparkles for Better Mental Health. Make sure you tune in for the next episode. Bye bye.